Somewhere on Earth right now, a hospital room is delivering a child who will help decide how the next century plays out. It's not in New York, it's not in London, it's not even in Beijing. By 2100, the single most likely place on the planet for a baby to be born is Africa. Not occasionally and not even as an exception, nearly half of every child born on Earth born there. 75 years ago, that number was 1 in 8. Nobody voted on this. No treaty caused it. No war, no campaign, no decision in any parliament on Earth. It is simply what happens when one set of numbers keeps climbing while every other one quietly falls. This is a number that can dramatically change our current world as we know it. The global replacement rate, the number needed just to keep a population stable, no growth, no shrinkage, is 2.1. Africa's fertility rate today, roughly 4.0 children per woman, nearly double the world average, almost 3 times Europe's. Europe's rate, 1.4. Every single European country is now below replacement level. 2 lines, same chart, moving in opposite directions for the same 50 years. Now, here's the part that surprises people. Global births are falling, even as world population keeps growing for now. World births in 2026, roughly 132 million, already lower than the year 2000. Africa's births, meanwhile, are still climbing. Africa's share of all global births, 24% in the year 2000, roughly 36% today. Projected to hit 48% by century's end, just under half of every child born on the planet. That's not Africa growing in isolation, that's Africa's line going up, while the rest of the world's line goes down, on the same graph, at the same time. India is not Africa's story, it's its own. India is already the most populous country on Earth, having passed China. But India's population is on a ceiling, not an open-ended climb. UN projections put India's peak somewhere in the 2060s near 1.7 billion, then a slow decline back to around 1.5 billion by 2100. India's fertility rate has already dropped to roughly replacement level. The story in India isn't explosive growth anymore. Its window is simply closing. India's working-age population is projected to start shrinking after 2045. India's elderly population, 60 plus, will more than double by 2050. China took 23 years to go from an aging society to an aged one. India will do it in 26. So this is 2 different mechanisms running on 2 different clocks, Africa still climbing, India already turning the corner toward its own aging crisis, just a few decades behind the West, not exempt from it. This isn't mysterious. It's the same demographic transition every region on Earth eventually goes through. Child mortality falls, life expectancy rises, and fertility takes a generation or 2 to catch up and fall too. Africa's infant mortality dropped from 145 per 1,000 births in 1960 to 38 per 1,000 today. Life expectancy rose from 43 years to 66. Fertility is falling here too, just from a much higher starting point, on a slower curve. There is no policy memo causing this. There is no campaign. It is biology and public health catching up to itself on a 50-year delay, region by region. Here is the part that doesn't make it into the optimistic version of this story. A growing population isn't just a growing workforce. It's a growing number of mouths, a growing number of bodies needing water, and a growing number of young people needing a job that, right now, doesn't exist. Water. Africa's population is set to double by 2050. Water demand doubles with it. The UN's own projections say up to 800 million Africans could face water scarcity by 2050. Today, 845 million people across the continent already lack safely managed drinking water. Over 900 million lack safe sanitation. Unsafe water and poor sanitation already kill more than 1 million Africans a year, and the African Union itself estimates that water insecurity is costing sub-Saharan Africa 5% of its GDP annually before a single one of the next billion people is even born. Food. Feeding the continent already requires 438 million tons of food a year. By 2050, that climbs to nearly 560 million tons, a 27% jump in less than 3 decades, layered on top of a climate model that already predicts shrinking crop yields and falling rainfall across the Sahel and East Africa. The math doesn't balance itself. Somebody has to close that gap, and right now, nobody fully has. Jobs. This is the one with the shortest fuse. Africa's youth population, ages 15 to 35, is projected to nearly double to roughly 830 million by 2050. Sub-Saharan Africa alone needs to create 25 million new jobs every single year for the next 25 years just to keep pace. Right now, of the roughly 12 million young Africans entering the labour market annually, only about 3 million find formal work. The other 9 million are absorbed into informal, unstable, low-wage work, or absorbed into nothing at all. That is not a future problem. The World Economic Forum itself has flagged this directly. Unemployment on this scale risks turning a generation meant to drive growth into, in their words, a source of instability instead. Kenya already gave the world a preview, youth-led protests over jobs and cost of living that shook the political establishment in real time. That wasn't a one-off. It's a warning shot for what scales up everywhere. This math doesn't get fixed, the slums absorbing all of it. Sub-Saharan Africa's urban population is set to nearly triple by 2050, from 414 million to over 1.2 billion. Most of those people are landing in cities whose infrastructure was never built for them. More than 60% of sub-Saharan Africans living in slums today have no piped water at all. Improved sanitation access in urban Africa barely moved between 1990 and 2010. It stayed flat at 43% while the population kept climbing. That's 2 decades where the population grew and the infrastructure simply didn't follow. The same population growth that builds the largest workforce on Earth is, city by city, outrunning the water pipes, the food supply, and the job market meant to support it. The dividend and the disaster are made of the exact same number. The aid, nobody can guarantee. For decades, the gap between Africa's needs and Africa's resources has been partially bridged by one thing: foreign aid. Western nations have sent somewhere between $55 and $75 billion a year in official development assistance to Africa, money for health systems, food security, water infrastructure, the exact pressure points this video just walked through. The main paradox of the situation is that aid is built on a foundation that's now cracking from both directions at once. On one side, the donors are shrinking. The same Western countries funding this aid are the ones with collapsing birth rates, aging populations, and rising domestic costs, pension systems, healthcare for the elderly, debt servicing. Money that once flowed outward increasingly has to stay home just to keep those systems from breaking. On the other side, the cuts aren't a future risk. They're already happening. Net bilateral aid from major donor countries to Africa fell to about $42 billion in 2024, a real terms drop from the year before. Sub-Saharan Africa specifically saw a 2% decline. Then, in 2025, the floor dropped further. US foreign assistance programs were slashed from roughly $120 billion down to $69 billion in a matter of months. Germany, France, and the UK all followed with their own cuts to development aid in the same stretch. So the math is brutal and immediate, not theoretical. The population that needs more support every year is being met with donor nations providing less at the exact moment those donor nations are also shrinking and aging out of their own ability to give. If a continent's water systems, food security, and health infrastructure have spent decades partially propped up by aid that's now actively being withdrawn, the question isn't hypothetical anymore. It's already being answered, country by country, budget cut by budget cut. Lagos in 2026, roughly 17 million people. By some metro area projections, Lagos could approach 90 million by the end of the century, a single city, larger than most countries on Earth today. Picture what that actually looks like on the ground, not on a chart. A city already straining to provide water and electricity to 17 million people is on a trajectory to hold 5 times that number. Informal settlements already without reliable sanitation, already with waste piling up in neighborhoods with no formal collection system, aren't an aberration. They're the default setting for growth this fast in infrastructure this far behind. It's a 24-year-old entering the job market this year, one of roughly 12 million young Nigerians and other young Africans doing the same, competing for a sliver of the 3 million formal jobs that exist for them, while the other 9 million get absorbed into gig work, street vending, or nothing at all. Multiply that single year by every year through 2050, and you get a generation stacking up faster than the economy can employ it. This is the unglamorous, granular version of the demographic dividend headline. It's not abstraction, it's a line at a borehole, a stalled job application, a neighborhood where the trash never gets collected because the city outgrew its own sanitation budget a decade ago. Population has always quietly been power. Workforce size, market size, cultural gravity. None of it requires a single act of aggression. It just requires time, and it comes with a bill attached. By 2050, sub-Saharan Africa alone will hold 22% of the entire global working age population. India holds another 18%. China's share is shrinking. The West's share keeps shrinking with it. On paper, that's the largest, youngest workforce in human history, coming online in one region. But the same UN data says up to 800 million of those same people could be water-stressed by that same year. The same projections that hand Africa economic gravity also hand it a jobs gap, measured in the tens of millions annually, and a sanitation deficit that's barely moved in 30 years. So here's the part nobody resolves out loud. The West needs the workforce growing fastest in the part of the world it has invested in the least, at the exact moment that region is trying to solve a resource equation it hasn't solved yet, and at the exact moment the West is pulling back the aid that's been quietly subsidizing the gap. Not a threat. A double-edged dependency cracking from both ends simultaneously. A continent that grew dependent on support it never controlled, and a donor bloc that's aging and shrinking out of its own capacity to keep giving it. Nobody chose this moment. Nobody can vote it away. The map of where humanity lives, works, and struggles is simply moving, quietly, on a 50-year clock that started decades before anyone alive today was born. The only question left is whether the infrastructure, the food supply, and the jobs catch up to the population before the population outruns all three, and before the aid that's been quietly holding the line finally runs out. Will this spell disaster for the future of the world? Let us know in the comments. This is Below the Surface, the news the mainstream shies away from.